When Vivian Marsh called and asked if I still remembered how to fix the old gate behind her house, I should have said no. Not because I'd forgotten. I built that gate. I knew every weld in it, every place the iron had been heated and bent and cooled until it held. I could have fixed it in my sleep. What I couldn't fix was the way my chest went tight when her name lit up my phone after almost 2 years of nothing but a Christmas card I never answered. Vivian Marsh, the mother of my best friend. The woman who used to leave the porch light on for me when I was 18 and had nowhere warmer to be. The woman who fed me at her kitchen table so many nights that her late husband once joked the county should start charging him a second mouth on the grocery bill. The woman who held my face in both hands at her son's funeral and said, "He loved you like a brother, Marcus. Don't you dare disappear on me too." I disappeared on her anyway. That's the part I'm not proud of. My name is Marcus Hale. I was 36, and I ran a small ironwork shop on the edge of a town that had been slowly dying since the mill closed before I was born. I made gates, railings, fences, the kind of work people only notice when it's gone. I had spent most of my life being the man you call when something breaks, and almost none of it being the man somebody calls just to hear his voice. 3 years before that phone rang, Raina and I had ended in the gravel lot outside my shop. She had her car already packed. She told me she'd taken a job 2 states over, and that she wasn't asking me to come, because she already knew I wouldn't. "You'll rust here," she said, "like everything you make." I remember standing there with grease still under my fingernails, watching her taillights shrink down the county road, thinking that of all the cruel things a person could say, rust was the one she'd chosen because she knew it would stay. Iron doesn't rust because it's weak. It rusts because it's been left out in the open too long, with no one to care for it. She didn't know that. She thought she'd handed me an insult. She'd handed me my whole life in one word, and walked away before I could decide whether she was right. So when Vivian's name appeared on my phone on a gray Tuesday, I let it ring 3 times while I argued with myself about whether I deserved to answer it. Then I did. "Vivian?" A breath on the other end. Then her voice, warmer than I had any right to, and tired underneath the warmth. "Marcus. Hi. I almost didn't call. You're not bothering me," I said, too fast. She heard it. Of course she did. Vivian always heard the thing you were trying not to say. "The back gate came off its hinge in the storm," she said. "The whole thing's hanging crooked, and the latch, well, you'd know the latch better than anyone." The latch. I closed my eyes in the dim of my shop. I knew exactly which latch she meant. There was only one in the world like it. "I'll come by," I said, "after I close up." "You don't have to." "I know." A pause. Then, softer than I expected, "Thank you, Marcus." I hung up and stood there a long time in the smell of cut metal and machine oil, telling myself it was just a gate. A broken gate, an old woman who needed help, and a man who happened to be good with iron. Nothing dangerous in that, nothing complicated. I changed my shirt twice before I drove over. Vivian's house sat at the end of a street where the trees were older than the houses. White clapboard, a porch that wrapped 2 sides, a garden out back that her husband Raymond used to fuss over before his heart gave out the spring before last. I had stood in that yard 100 times as a kid. I'd learned to throw a baseball there. I'd gotten my first real lecture about responsibility there, from Raymond, after Eli and I borrowed his truck without asking and put a dent in the tailgate. I'd cried there, once, where nobody could see, the night after the funeral. I hadn't been back since. When I pulled in, the first thing I saw was the gate, exactly as she'd said, hanging off one hinge, the bottom corner dragging in the mud, the whole frame torqued sideways by the wind. The second thing I saw was Vivian. She was standing near the garden in a faded denim shirt, with the sleeves pushed up, her gray-streaked hair pinned loosely off her neck, a pair of work gloves dangling from one hand. 51 years old, and she carried it the way some women carry a song they've known their whole life, easily, without apology, like she had nothing left to prove to anybody who was looking. I got out of the truck and immediately wished I hadn't noticed any of that. "Marcus Hale," she said, and her mouth did something complicated, half a smile fighting something heavier. "Look at you. You got broad. It's the work. It's the years." She crossed the grass toward me, then stopped, like she'd remembered there was a distance she was supposed to keep. "You look good. You look like your father. That's the worst thing you could have said to me." She laughed, surprised, a real laugh, and I felt it land somewhere I'd boarded up a long time ago. We both looked at the gate so we wouldn't have to keep looking at each other. "The storm did a number on it," she said. "The storm finished what time started." I crouched beside the frame, ran my hand along the bottom rail. The metal was sound. The hinge had simply given out, and the wind had done the rest. "This is an easy fix. Couple hours, maybe. You don't have to rush." I looked up at her. "I'm not rushing." And there it was. The first time in 2 years that I let myself look at Vivian Marsh for 1 second longer than a man should look at his dead best friend's mother. She looked back. Then she looked away first, down at the gloves in her hands, and a faint color came up in her face that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'll make coffee," she said, and went inside before either of us could say anything we'd have to take back. I got my tools and went to work, and that's when I saw it. The latch. A small iron leaf, the edges curled like a leaf does in fall, hammered out by hand and fitted to the gatepost. Most people who walked past it their whole lives never gave it a second glance, but I knew it the way you know your own handwriting. Eli forged that latch. We were 17. We'd taken over a corner of my uncle's shop for a summer, 2 stupid kids playing with fire, and Eli, who was good at nothing with his hands and proud of it, decided he wanted to make one thing. Just one. He burned himself twice. He cursed at the metal like it had personally wronged him, and at the end of 3 sweaty afternoons he had this crooked little iron leaf that didn't sit quite straight and never would. "It's perfect," he'd said, holding it up to the light, grinning like a fool. "It's lopsided," I'd told him. "It's character," he'd said. We mounted it on the gate we built for his mother that same summer. A gift. Vivian had cried when she saw it. Raymond had pretended he had something in his eye. 2 years later, Eli was gone. A wet road, a turn he took too fast, 19 years old forever. And the only thing he ever made in this life that would outlast him was a lopsided iron leaf on a gate behind his mother's house. I knelt there in the mud and touched it with one finger, and I had to look away before I came apart in a stranger's yard. The screen door creaked. Vivian came down the steps with 2 mugs. "You found the leaf," she said quietly. I never stopped knowing where it was. She handed me a mug. Our fingers touched, and neither of us moved them apart as fast as we should have. The coffee was exactly the way I'd taken it at her table 15 years ago. Black, a little too strong, the way Raymond made it. "You remembered," I said. "I remember a lot of things, Marcus." She sat down on the bottom porch step, careful, like her knees were negotiating with her. "I remember a boy who used to eat me out of house and home and then do every dish in the sink so I wouldn't have to. I remember the way you'd go quiet when something hurt you and how nobody ever bothered to notice but me. I should have laughed it off, made a joke, kept the air light. Instead I said, Raina used to call that boring." Vivian's mug paused halfway to her mouth. "The quiet," I said. "She called it boring, said I had no horizon." Vivian set the mug down on the step beside her. When she looked at me, there was something fierce moving under the tiredness in her face. "Raina," she said, "didn't know the difference between a man who has no horizon and a man who is the horizon. Some people you stand next to, some people you stand on. You were never the first kind, Marcus. That's why she had to call it something small, because the real thing would have meant staying." I didn't have an answer for that, so I picked up my drill and fixed her gate, because iron was easier than whatever was happening on that porch step. I should have packed up the second the gate swung clean and driven home with the radio loud. Instead, I stayed for the sandwich. It shouldn't have meant anything. It was a sandwich, ham and good mustard, and a tomato she sliced from her own garden, sitting at her kitchen table, the same table where I'd done my homework as a teenager because the house I grew up in was too loud for thinking. The yellow walls were the same. The clock that ran 4 minutes slow was the same. The chair I sat in had a worn spot on the left armrest from 20 years of me sitting in it. But the house was quieter now. No Raymond's boots by the door. No Eli thundering down the stairs. Just Vivian, moving around her own kitchen in the soft afternoon light, and me, watching her hands and pretending I wasn't. "You never married," she said. It wasn't a question. Came close once. "Raina. Raina." I turned the mug in my hands. After she left, I figured I was just a place people stopped on the way to somewhere better. The guy you date until you find your real life. I shrugged. I made my peace with it. Vivian stopped slicing. She set the knife down, deliberate, and braced both hands on the counter, her back to me. "Don't do that," she said. "Do what?" "Make small the thing that was the best part of you." She turned around. Her eyes were wet, and she wasn't bothering to hide it. "Do you know what I would have given for Raymond to be the kind of man who stayed quiet and noticed? 41 years I was married to a good man who loved me and never once looked at me the way you just looked at that gate. Like it mattered, like it was worth doing right." The kitchen got very still. The slow clock ticked. I knew I should change the subject. I knew where the edge of the room was. I knew Eli was standing in every corner of that house watching me. But I'd spent 3 years being told I was a man without a horizon, and here was this woman telling me the opposite with her whole face. "Vivian," I said. "I know." She wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist and laughed, embarrassed. "I know. I'm being foolish. I'm a lonely old woman, and you came to fix my gate, and I'm making it strange. Eat your sandwich, Marcus. Forget I said anything." I didn't forget. I never forgot a single thing she said that day. I went back Saturday. I told myself it was for the latch. The leaf had loosened over the years, and the storm had jostled it worse. A man should fix a thing all the way, or not at all. That was the reason I gave myself, and it was even a little bit true. Vivian was in the garden when I pulled in. She straightened up when she saw the truck, and for half a second her whole face opened before she remembered to be careful with it. "You came back," she said. "The latch needed tightening." "The latch," she repeated, and we both knew the latch was an excuse, and we both let it be one. I worked on the leaf while she pretended to weed beside me. Every few minutes she found a reason to speak, to ask about my shop, about the new bridge the county was putting in, about whether I still took my coffee strong. And every few minutes I found a reason to answer her longer than the question deserved. At one point she reached past me for the hand trowel, and her shoulder brushed mine, and we both went still. The wind moved the leaves over our heads. A dog barked somewhere down the street. I could smell the garden on her, dirt and crushed mint, and something underneath that was just her, the same as it had been when I was 18 and she'd hug me goodnight at the door. She didn't move away. Neither did I. Then a car slowed on the street, and we both heard it, and the spell broke. Vivian sat back on her heels. I went back to the latch. We didn't look at each other for a full minute. I tightened the leaf onto the post and tested it. It held. Lopsided, the way Eli left it, the way it would always be. "He'd hate this," I said, before I could stop myself. Vivian went still. "Hate what?" I didn't answer right away. The leaf sat crooked between us, catching the light. "I keep waiting for him to walk out that door and tell me to get out of his mother's garden," I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me I'm not allowed to feel like this." There, I'd said it. Like this. I'd let it out into the air where it couldn't be taken back. Vivian's eyes filled. She didn't look away. "He loved you," she said carefully, "more than he loved his own sister some days. God forgive me for saying it. And I have spent 2 years thinking that the only thing left of my son is a crooked piece of iron on a gate." She reached out and touched the leaf, gentle, like it was warm. "And then you called me back into my own life by accident, Marcus, and I started thinking maybe that's not the only thing he left me. Maybe he left me you, the boy he loved, the man he didn't get to become friends with." "That's not the same thing," I said. "No." She drew her hand back. "It isn't. And I'm not confused about which is which. I just need you to know I'm not." She stood up, brushing the dirt off her knees, and her voice changed, steadier now, like she was deciding something. "I am not going to be a sad old woman reaching for her dead son's best friend because the house is too quiet. If that's what this is, then we stop now, today, and you go home and we send Christmas cards and that's the end of it. I stood up too. We were 6 feet apart, and somehow much closer than that. And if it's not that? I asked. Vivian looked at me for a long moment. The leaf latch sat on the post between us, crooked and stubborn and alive. Then we do it honestly, she said. Or not at all. I should have driven home then. I should have let the quiet have the last word, the way it always did. Instead, I said, Saturday after next. The hinge on the other side is going. She knew it wasn't going. So did I. That would help, she said softly. It was the safest answer in the world. It was also not the whole truth, and we both knew it. If you've ever been the steady one, the dependable one, the person everybody counts on but nobody chooses, then you already know the strangest part of this story isn't that I started falling for my best friend's mother. The strangest part is that for the first time in years, I felt like I was allowed to want anything at all. So before I tell you what happened when Eli's sister found out, do me a favor and tell me in the comments, has anybody ever made you feel small for being steady? I want to know I'm not the only one. Now, back to the gate. It went on like that through the back half of that summer. A loose railing on the porch, a latch on the garden shed, a section of fence the deer had pushed through. Vivian's house had a remarkable talent for breaking, right around the time I started to wonder if I'd worn out my welcome. We were careful. We were so careful it was almost unbearable. We never said the word, we never crossed the line, but the line got thinner every week, worn down by 1,000 small things. The coffee waiting for me when I pulled in, the way she started cooking enough for two without being asked, the way I started keeping a clean shirt in the truck, the way she laughed at things that weren't quite funny, just to keep the laugh going, the way I'd catch her watching me work, and she'd catch me catching her, and neither of us would look away as fast as we used to. One evening in August, the power went out across half the county. Storm rolling in off the river. I was finishing a weld on her shed when the sky opened, and we ran for the porch laughing like kids, soaked through, and stood there under the eave watching the rain come down in sheets. She was shivering. I gave her my jacket without thinking, draped it over her shoulders, and my hands stayed there a second too long, on the curve of her shoulders, the warmth of her coming up through the wet fabric. She turned her head, looked up at me. The rain was loud and the porch was dark, and her face was close enough that I could see the gray flecks in her hazel eyes and the way her breath had gone shallow. For one whole heartbeat, neither of us pretended. I have never in my life wanted to do something more than I wanted to close that last inch of space. And I didn't. Because I'm Marcus Hale, and I have spent my whole life fixing things the right way or not at all, and Vivian Marsh deserved more than a kiss stolen in the dark during a power outage where we could both blame the storm. I stepped back. She let out a breath that was half a laugh and half something that hurt. "You're a maddening man," she said. "I've been told. By Raina. By everyone. Eventually." She pulled my jacket tighter around herself and looked out at the rain. "She was a fool," she said quietly. "Raina. I never met her, but she was a fool." I didn't answer. I just stood there beside her, close enough that our arms touched, and watched the storm wash the dust off her garden and let the wanting sit in my chest where it couldn't get either of us in trouble. That was the closest we came for a long time. It was also the night I knew, all the way down, that this wasn't loneliness. Loneliness would have taken the kiss. What I felt was something that could wait, something that wanted to be done right. It was Bridget who broke it open. Eli's sister, older than him by 4 years, sharp where he'd been soft, the kind of grief that turns to flint instead of water. After Eli died, Bridget had become the keeper of his memory the way some people become the keeper of a wound, guarding it, feeding it, making sure no one ever got to set it down. She showed up at the house on a Sunday in September while I was reforging a bracket in the garden. I heard the car door, and then I heard her voice, and I knew before I saw her face that the careful summer was over. "Mom?" Bridget stood at the gate, Eli's gate, the leaf latch right there under her hand, looking from her mother on the porch to me in the garden and back again. "What is he doing here?" "Bridget," Vivian stood up slowly. "I didn't know you were coming." Clearly. Bridget's eyes raked over me, the grease on my hands, the shirt I'd brought from the truck, the 2 coffee mugs on the porch rail. Mrs. Dolan down the street said Marcus Hale's truck has been parked here every Saturday for 2 months. I told her she had to be mistaken. Her voice cracked, then hardened. She wasn't mistaken, was she? He's been helping me with the house, Vivian said. The house? Bridget laughed, an ugly sound. 2 months of helping with the house. Mom, he was Eli's best friend. Eli worshipped him. I know who he was, Vivian said. Then you know how this looks. Bridget turned on me, and there it was. The full force of her grief pointed like a blade. How dare you? How dare you? He's been gone 2 years, and you crawl back into his mother's life like she's some lonely old. Bridget! Vivian's voice was a warning. But Bridget was crying now, the flint cracking, the wound bleeding through. You don't get to do this, she said to me. You don't get to take him from us, and then take her too. You weren't even there. You disappeared. You couldn't even be bothered to come to the second funeral. The 1 year, you sent a card, and now you're here playing house in my mother's yard like you have any right. And here's the thing. For most of my life, when someone aimed that kind of pain at me, I made myself small. I apologized for taking up room. I let people name the temperature of the room, and then I adjusted myself to it. That was the man Raina left. That was the man who watched taillights shrink down a county road and decided maybe rust was a fair word for him. But I'd spent a whole summer being looked at like I mattered. So I set down the bracket. I wiped my hands on the rag, and I walked to the gate, and I stood on the other side of it from Bridget, with the leaf latch right there between us, the last thing her brother ever made. You're right that I disappeared, I said. My voice was steady. I was a coward about your brother's death, and I'll carry that the rest of my life. I should have been here. For you, for your mother, for myself. I wasn't. I'll own that. Bridget blinked, thrown off by the lack of a fight. But you don't get to do the rest of it, I said. You don't get to use Eli to keep your mother in a box. He didn't die so she could spend the rest of her life being quiet and grateful and small. He'd be the first one telling her to live. You know that. You knew him. Don't tell me who my brother was. I'm not. I touched the leaf latch, gently, the way Vivian had touched it. He made this when we were 17. Burned himself twice doing it. You know what he said when it came out crooked? He said it had character. My throat tightened. He'd look at all of us standing here being scared of each other, and he'd say we were being idiots, and he'd be right. The yard went silent. Even the wind held still. Bridget stared at me, then at her mother, then at the crooked iron leaf under her hand, and something in her face came apart. Not the anger, the thing underneath it, the thing all of us had been carrying alone. I miss him, she said, and it came out broken. I know, Vivian said, coming down the steps. I know, baby, so do I. Every single day. And then it wasn't a fight anymore. It was just 3 people standing around a gate, grieving the same person 3 different ways, finally in the same place at the same time. Bridget didn't bless it. She wasn't ready. She got in her car and drove off shaking, and it would be a long time before she came back. But she'd stopped guarding the wound long enough to feel it, and sometimes that's the most you can ask for. That night, in the kitchen, Vivian and I finally said the thing out loud. She was washing the mugs at the sink, and I came to stand beside her, and she turned the water off and gripped the counter the way she had that first afternoon. I need to be sure of something, she said, not looking at me. Okay? This can't be because you got told you had no horizon, and it can't be because I got told I'd spend the rest of my life alone. She turned to face me, and her eyes were clear and steady, and frightened all at once. I will not be the woman who lost her husband and reached for the first warm body that paid attention to her. And I will not let you be the man who finally felt seen and mistook it for love. Do you understand me? If that's all this is, I'd rather we end it tonight with our dignity than ruin it later with the truth. That was the most Vivian thing she could have said. Even standing on the edge of it, even wanting it as badly as I did, she was trying to protect me from making a mistake. It started before this summer, I said. Her breath caught. I don't mean when Eli was alive. I never let myself look at you then, and I don't think you let yourself look at me. But after he died, when I disappeared, I had to stop and find the words. I told myself I stayed away because the grief was too much. The house, the memories, Raymond, all of it. And that was part of it. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is I stayed away because some part of me already knew that if I came back to this kitchen, I'd never be able to leave it. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. I don't want you because I'm lonely, I said. I'm lonely everywhere. I want you because when I'm here, in this kitchen, with you, I stop feeling like a man who rusted. I feel like a man who got tended to, like somebody finally cared enough to keep me out of the weather. Vivian made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh. You and your iron, she whispered. It's the only thing I know how to talk about. She lifted her hand then, not to touch me, not yet, just held it there in the space between us, hovering near my chest, like she was asking the air for permission. I covered her hand with mine, pressed it flat against my shirt, over the heartbeat she'd somehow restarted. This is the line, she said. I know. If we cross it in the daylight. No sneaking, no hiding from Bridget, from the town, from any of it. I have buried a husband and a son. I am done being ashamed of being alive. No hiding, I said. She looked up at me. We were close enough now that I could feel her breath, close enough that the last inch was finally allowed to disappear. And then she stepped back. Not because she didn't want it, because she did. Not tonight, she said, and her voice shook. I want to want this with a clear head, in the morning, when there's no storm and no fight and no excuse. I want to choose it. Can you give me that? I could have argued. I wanted to argue with every cell in my body. Instead, I said, take all the time you need. I left her house without kissing her. It was the right thing. I hated how right it felt. I got to my truck, and my phone buzzed. A text from Vivian, sent while I was still walking down her driveway. Thank you for not letting me throw away my dignity for one good minute. I read it twice in the dark. Then a second message came through. But Marcus, I wanted you to anyway. I looked back at the house. She was standing in the lit kitchen window, one hand against the glass, watching me leave with a face full of fear and hope, and something neither of us had named for 2 whole years. I texted back, I know. Then, that's why I didn't. I drove home before I could become less honest than the man she thought I was. We took it slow after that, painfully, deliberately slow. For 2 weeks we did almost nothing but talk. On the phone, on her porch in the daylight where the whole street could see, at the one diner in town where the booths had cracked vinyl and the coffee was worse than either of ours. We let people see us. We let them talk. And they did talk. In a town that small, a 36-year-old man taking the widow Marsh to the diner is front-page news. Some of it was cruel. Mrs. Dolan stopped saying hello. A few of Raymond's old friends gave me looks that could have stripped paint. But some of it surprised me. Old Mr. Petrov, who'd taught us both in high school, stopped me on the sidewalk one day and said, "She buried a boy and a husband inside 2 years. You make her laugh again, son, and the rest of this town can mind its own grief." Then he walked off before I could thank him. Vivian and Bridget didn't speak for a month, then 6 weeks. Then one Sunday Vivian called me, and she was crying, but the good kind, and she said Bridget had finally picked up the phone. They'd talked for 2 hours, mostly about Eli, a little, at the end, about me. "She's not ready," Vivian said. "She might not be ready for a long time, but she said one thing, Marcus. She said, if it has to be anyone, at least it's someone who loved him too." It wasn't a blessing, but it was a door left open a crack, and I had spent enough of my life standing in front of cracked doors to know what to do with one. A month after that, on a cold, bright Sunday, I took Vivian to the river. Not the house, not the kitchen. Somewhere with no ghosts in it. We walked along the water with our coffees, and at some point her hand found mine, and she laced her fingers through and called it efficient, because her hands were cold, and I let her have the lie because the truth was right there in how she held on. That was the first time I kissed her, standing by the river with the wind coming off the water and her cold fingers in mine and not a single person around to see it, which made it ours and nobody else's. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music. Just her mouth warm against the cold, and a small sound in her throat, and the astonishing fact of being wanted, on purpose, in the daylight, by a woman who had every reason to be done with the world, and had chosen instead to begin again. When we pulled apart, her forehead rested against mine. "Took you long enough," she whispered. "I wanted to do it right." "You did everything right," she laughed, breathless. "It's infuriating." 6 months passed, the way 6 months do. There were signs of us everywhere by then. My truck in her driveway so often the neighbors stopped noticing. A second toothbrush, my work boots by her back door, her reading glasses on my workbench at the shop, because she'd taken to bringing a book and sitting with me while I worked, the smell of metal and her perfume mixing into something that felt, for the first time in my life, like home. Bridget came to dinner. Once. It was awful, and then it was less awful. And then near the end, Vivian burned the rolls and set off the smoke alarm, and the three of us ended up laughing on the back porch waving dish towels at the ceiling. And for 10 whole minutes, Eli was in the room with us, not as an absence but as a joke he would have loved. It wasn't fixed. Grief doesn't fix. But it had stopped being a wound we each guarded alone. It had become a thing we carried together. A year after Vivian called me about a broken gate, I started building a new one. I didn't tell her. I built it in the shop at night, after hours, out of the best iron I had, hours of it, heating, bending, cooling, the work my hands knew better than my own heartbeat, a gate worthy of the garden it would hang in, worthy of the woman who would walk through it. And on the post, I mounted one thing I hadn't forged myself, Eli's leaf. I'd taken it off the old gate and cleaned 20 years of weather off it, careful as surgery, and I fitted it onto the new gate exactly as crooked as the day he made it. Because some things you don't straighten. Some things hold the whole truth precisely because they're a little bent. 2 years after the storm knocked her gate off its hinge, I asked Vivian Marsh to marry me in her own backyard, in front of the new gate, with Eli's leaf catching the late afternoon sun. Bridget was there. She'd come around, slowly, the way real things come around. She stood off to the side with her hand over her mouth and tears running down her face, and when I got down on one knee, she made a sound that I'll keep for the rest of my life, because it was the sound of a wound finally turning back into love. Vivian looked at the gate. Then she looked at the leaf. Then she looked at me, kneeling in the grass with grease that would never fully come out of my knuckles, and she touched the crooked iron leaf the way she'd touched it that first afternoon, like it was warm, like it was alive. "He'd have hated us being this slow," she said, laughing through the tears. "He'd have called us idiots. He'd have been right." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "This gate caused a great deal of trouble, Marcus Hale." "No," I said. "It told the truth. It just took us a while to listen." She said yes. Not quickly, not carelessly. She said it the way a woman says a word she has fully understood the weight of, and chosen anyway, with her eyes open and her hand on her son's iron leaf, and the whole quiet town be damned. People ask, sometimes, how it happened, how a man ends up marrying his dead best friend's mother in a town small enough to count its own gossip. Vivian usually says, "He fixed my gate." I usually say, "She made me a sandwich." Both are true. Neither is the whole truth. The whole truth is that Raina looked at a steady man and called him rust, and Vivian looked at the same man and saw something worth keeping out of the weather. Same iron, 2 different sets of eyes. The difference was never me. I spent most of my life believing that being dependable made me easy to leave, that the quiet ones, the steady ones, the ones who fix things and stay, that we were the placeholders other people kept until the loud thing came along. I don't believe that anymore, because the right person doesn't call your stillness boring. The right person sits down inside it and exhales like they've been looking for a place to rest their whole life. So let me ask you 2 things before you go. Has someone ever taken the steadiest, most loyal part of you and made it sound like a flaw, when really, they just weren't built to recognize the rarest thing they'd ever been handed? And have you ever found out, too late or just in time, that the person who finally saw you clearly was standing somewhere you'd been told you were never allowed to look? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this one reached something in you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.